Hi, everyone, and welcome to this podcast on the successions of equilibria across different temporal horizons. Let's first come back to the equilibrium in perfect competition. In this situation, W, P, and R are perfectly flexible and enable an equilibrium on every market. Agents are rational, and the maximization conditions under perfect competition are satisfied. Of course, this situation is unrealistic, but it still constitutes a reference situation towards which the economy would converge in the long run under perfectly flexible market conditions. In this situation, there are five endogenous variables: Y, R, N, P, and W. So how can we represent and calculate the macroeconomic general equilibrium in this economy? It's actually pretty simple. We first determine the equilibrium on the labor market, which is the intersection between the labor demand curve and the labor supply curve. Note that here we use a constant labor supply, but the curve could also be increasing. In any case, we find the equilibrium amount of labor N star and the associated equilibrium real wage W over P star. From N star, using the production function, we calculate the level of production Y star. Then we go up into the plane YR, and using Y star, we calculate R star by equalizing supply and demand on the goods markets. And for this level R star, there exists one level of prices on the money markets. So we find P star using the LM equation. Then, with P star, we can easily find W star using the equilibrium real wage. Overall, we were able to calculate the five endogenous variables, and we represented the general equilibrium in the economy. This equilibrium is called a valorization general equilibrium because we are in perfect competition. The valorization equilibrium is an equilibrium with full employment. Now, we are going to remove the assumption of perfect competition, because in reality, we do observe some structural unemployment that persists in the economy. So from now on, we will set the model in an environment of imperfect competition with real rigidities. This means that the representative firm will behave as a firm in a situation of monopolistic competition, rationing the goods market and selling at a higher price than in perfect competition. And second real rigidity, the real wage negotiated by social groups is fixed. Be careful here, we do not have any nominal rigidities. W, P, and R are flexible. We only have real rigidities on the goods market and on the labor market. In this context, the labor demand of the firm is lower than the labor demand in perfect competition. So graphically, the labor demand curve in imperfect competition, N tilde, in blue, is below the labor demand curve in perfect competition. For the negotiated real wage gamma, the labor demand is always lower than supply. So, even in the long run, there always is some persistent unemployment. Nevertheless, the monopolistic firm maximizes its profit under the technical constraints of the production function, P and R are then deducted from IS for R and LM for P, as we said before. The nominal wage is then calculated using P star into the expression of the real wage gamma. All right, let's determine the short-term equilibrium now. We consider that W and P are rigid at values W bar and P bar. Only the interest rate remains flexible. Because of these nominal rigidities, there is no possible adjustment in case of excess demand or supply. We suppose that the goods market is in a situation of excess supply due to an insufficient effective demand. We also suppose that the labor market is in excess supply. There is unemployment. To values of W and P fixed corresponds a value of W bar over P bar, at which the firms have a labor demand corresponding to short-term ND, and a supply of goods taking into account the technical constraint, which corresponds to short-term YS. To maximize their profits under the technical constraint, firms would like to produce a quantity YS. However, because of the demand constraint and price rigidity, they cannot. We say that there is rationing on the long side of the market, and firms are constrained to produce less than what they would have wanted at the given real wage. The short-term level of production is therefore set by the level of the demand, and short-term YD becomes short-term Y. This equilibrium does hide, however, some tensions on the goods market. Anyway, at this level of production, the firms will pass on the constraint to the labor market and hire less people. Instead of asking for ND, they will seek a lower level N, short term. We see that this level of labor at the given real wage does not enable the firms to maximize profits. The equilibrium is below the labor supply and also below the labor demand. Unemployment is high, higher than in the long-term equilibrium that we saw in the previous slide. The equilibrium interest rate is then deducted from IS or LM, and we have all our endogenous variables calculated and represented in the graph. Let's now go to the medium term. With time, the signals of this equilibrium will push prices up. In the medium term, prices are therefore flexible, while the nominal wage remains rigid. Indeed, we usually consider that wages are less flexible than prices. So, in the short term, we reached an equilibrium, but which was hiding an excess supply of goods. This excess supply results in a decrease in prices, as firms will progressively decrease their prices to sell more goods and maximize their profits. The general level of prices goes down, and this will have two effects. One, the supply of goods will decrease compared to the short-term supply. This is because a decrease in P will increase the real wage, which will in turn reduce the supply of goods. Remember that the supply of goods is a decreasing function of the real wage. Second effect, the decrease in P will increase the demand of goods through the channel of the interest rate. If P decreases, the real balances M over P increase, which means that the money market is in excess supply. This leads to a decrease in R to come back to the equilibrium. This decrease in R will push up investment and therefore the demand. Overall, the decrease in P enables the economy to reach the equilibrium at a lower level of prices than in the short term. The interest rate is also lower than in the short term. To the equilibrium production value of medium term YMT corresponds a level of employment N medium term higher than the level of employment in the short term. We observe that despite an increase in real wage, because P decreased, the employment still increases. This apparent paradox comes from the fact that in the medium term, the firms reintegrate their labor demand curve, while in the short term, they were constrained and were not able to maximize their profits. In the medium term, they can maximize their profits, which results in higher employment despite an increase in the cost of labor. Overall, in the medium term, we reach an equilibrium on the goods market. But there still is some unemployment on the labor market due to the nominal rigidity of wages and to imperfect competition. This equilibrium is not a general variation equilibrium. Finally, let's look at what happens in the long term. In the long term, we can consider that the nominal wage is no longer rigid. So now we have W, P, and R flexible, but with real rigidities due to the imperfect competition. Because the general level of prices decreased in the medium term, the real wage became higher than its negotiated value. Wage negotiations will therefore impose a decrease in the nominal wage, so that the real wage comes back to its original value. This decrease will trigger a downward wage price spiral, and so a decrease in the general level of prices. Indeed, the decrease in W results in a decrease in W over P. This increases the supply of goods. We are then in excess supply of goods, which pushes prices down, which in turn leads to an increase in W over P above the negotiated real wage. The wage decreases again, and so the prices, and so on and so forth. The spiral continues until we are back to the negotiated real wage. When we're there, we are back to the long-term equilibrium that we described earlier on, and the level of labor demand is the one that allows for profit maximization at the given negotiated real wage. Under the technical constraints, we calculate the equilibrium production of long term, and we can then calculate the equilibrium interest rate using IS and the equilibrium level of prices using LM. Finally, using P star and gamma, we can find the equilibrium level of nominal wages. The level of employment has increased since medium term, but remember, there still is some unemployment persisting in the economy in the long term, because we are in imperfect competition. We can now represent the succession of equilibria in the plane yp with a decreasing quasi-demand and an increasing quasi-supply. In the short term, with rigid prices and insufficient effective demand, we see the excess supply of goods that was mentioned earlier. For a rigid P, short-term YS is higher than short-term YD. The firm does not maximize its profits because the short-term equilibrium is located outside of its supply curve. In the medium term, the decrease in prices will push up the demand and push down the supply. Again, remember that the mechanism for the demand is indirect. It goes through the interest rate. The decrease in P triggers a decrease in the interest rate, which will result in an increase in investment and demand. After these adjustments, we reach the equilibrium between quasi-supply and quasi-demand for a level of prices that is below its short-term level. In the long term, because the real wage has become higher, the nominal wage decreases and the curve YS shifts to the right. Indeed, remember that W is not expressed in the axis, which is why the decrease in W results in the curve YS to actually shift. Because P is expressed in the axis, a decrease in P results in a movement along the curve and not in the curve shifting. Anyway, the decrease in W and the downward wage price spiral lead to the long-term equilibrium with lower P and higher Y.